Hi and welcome to this video which will talk through writing concisely and really give you the opportunity to start reflecting upon your own work that you've presented to date and think about how you can present that more concisely. So the purpose of writing concisely, quite often it's actually to do with word count. Quite often I get a number of students that will come to me and want to find out how that they can fit everything in within the word count that they've been given. So reducing word count is a big issue for students, but likewise, so is the way that you communicate your work. And it's really important to communicate your knowledge and argument clearly, concisely, and without ambiguity. And that can really make a difference on your marks in terms of presentation. Quite often we just need to get to the point more quickly, and we need to be able to demonstrate the deeper and broader knowledge and argument by releasing more words, which will then contribute to your overall marks. So if you're spending more time on kind of waffle type of words, which we'll go through with you in this video, then we really need to start thinking about how do we cut that down so we can spend more time on the areas that really are going to get you more marks. And that tends to be more around the argument that you're presenting, your analysis, your evaluation and synthesis. So common issues with, I'm going to use the phrase wordiness. They tend to be associated with cliches, intensifiers, adverbs and adjectives. And I think you'll probably realise that some of these phrases link back to basics that you may even be involved with working with children at the moment in terms of supporting their learning. Stock phrases, verbal phrases, paired synonyms and filler words. So we're going to address some of those, but some of the ones that I really think that will make a difference for you, and obviously you can take time to reflect upon your own work, having looked at some of these issues that we'll go through. So what can you do then? First thing to think about is cliches. They tend to be phrases that have kind of lost their specific meaning. If there's some phrases here for you, which would probably encourage you to try and avoid, and they're perfectly acceptable sentences, but perhaps not in an academic way. So at this moment in time, where you could actually say currently. A phrase I'll often hear, it's commonly known. Well, perhaps if you're going to use a phrase like that, make sure that when you're referencing that commonly is associated with more than one reference, because the two don't go hand in hand. If you've got one reference, you're saying commonly known or broadly known. The phrase pros and cons, we kind of want to get rid of that one. And benefits and limitations perhaps would be more appropriate in this day and age, in contemporary society, for example. So there are kind of lots of cliches, and you may not even realise that you're doing that at the moment. So certainly as you start to get feedback, you may get feedback about cliches, and that's something you kind of want to avoid. And I've got a number of different links associated with the slides and again at the end of the slides that you may want to refer to read a little bit more. So intensifiers, well, these are kind of words that try to accentuate a word. For example, it really is a really overused word in academic writing. So instead of saying really big losses, you can replace that with significant losses. So you kind of want to start thinking about how can I replace some of these words, such as greatly, extremely, basically, obviously, really. Really is probably the one that I tend to see a lot of. Think about how you could put that in just one word. I use a website called Power Thesaurus. And that's absolutely brilliant, and I put the link at the end. where you can actually put a couple of words in and it will make suggestions for new words that you could use. So it's important to think about if you're using words to accentuate already an adjective, then think about whether or not we really do need those. And that's what moves us on to adverbs and adjectives. So adjectives are words that describe a noun, a person, a place, for example, an item, where adverbs are words that describe a verb action, so what it is that you're actually doing. And a verb is a doing word. And it often ends with illy. And there's a great example here of an adjective and an adverb here. So he is quick. So he being the noun is quick, that's the adjective. But he walks away quickly. So we're kind of saying exactly the same thing, but adding an adverb. So really, there are some unnecessary words that if you were writing kind of fiction type of work, or if you've come straight from A-levels, for example, when you've been asked to write really beautiful writing, really, describe and paint the picture in a lot more detail using your words. That's kind of like we're moving away from that now. So we're moving away from that time descriptive language to kind of getting to the point a bit quicker and spending more time on your analysis and your evaluation, for example. There are often, and I suppose these stock phrases are quite similar to cliches in a way. So there tend to be overused phrases which compromise the clarity. So, for example, has the ability to, or due to the fact that, that's one that gets used quite a bit, regardless of the fact. So at this point in time, all of these kind of word phrases as such can be reduced down to single words. So can, because, due to the fact, because, regardless of the fact, although it still has the same meaning. So your clarity isn't compromised by changing some of these words. But in fact, you've now saved a number of different words, which often, if you've got to save a few hundred words, this is something to be considering. Another phrase which is used quite a lot, despite this, because often this is used, or in contrast even, could be replaced by other words. So despite this, for example, could be nonetheless or nevertheless. It means the same thing. In contrast could be contrastingly. So there are other words that you can use. So using something like power thesaurus, it could help you in starting to develop your language, because it's really hard to develop that without actually knowing what to use. And that's where I suggest that you guys work together. If you've got study buddy groups, help each other out and start Googling and using the internet, using your books to support you in starting to think of new words. Likewise, the more that you read, the more academic journals in particular will really help you with your vocabulary as well. Verbal phrases, so again, they contribute very little to the writing and can often be reduced to fewer words. So this is a core things coming out here now around how can I start reducing, say the same thing but in less words. That's really the core learning point. So for example, to come to a conclusion, you can say to conclude, to take into consideration, consider. So there are different phrases that can be used that really do mean the same thing. And again, really wider reading just generally will help develop and build upon that vocabulary. And that does take time, it really does. And if this is a task that you really want to develop, make sure that you allow enough time in your proofreading to develop that further. Pairs synonyms then. So these have the same meaning and can be replaced by one word that you feel is more suitable. So for example, you've got a range of different ones here. So sudden crisis, for example. Well, a crisis is something that usually happens suddenly. So crisis is fine. Each and every well, every means exactly the same. It means the same thing. So quite often, it's just something to be aware of, that you can have two words in a sentence that mean exactly the same thing, and it wouldn't be any issue if you removed one of those. You've got some more examples on this slide, which will provide you, and you'll be able to look at the slides yourself, provide you with some more examples of where to avoid unnecessary repetition. So, for example, in the last one, blue whales are very big. We could just go with blue whales are enormous. Enormous replaces the very big. So again, that's one of those words, the very, as being an intensifier for you to keep an eye out of. Okay. And just generally, some more examples here. And again, you'll start building upon this, but still remains. We can just go with remains at the present time, currently. So a good thing to do is simple, search in Google, alternative phrase for, and pop something in if you want to. Use Power Thesaurus, and we'll also show you Grammarly in a bit. Okay. Now, once you've kind of started proofreading for some of those areas, we've got some more tips for you on cutting words down. Now, you've got the strike through tool on Google Docs, it's on Word. So as you start proofreading your work, we encourage, rather than deleting, this is really important, start striking through words. Or, as I prefer, I must admit, I prefer to print off my work and then strike through with a pen. And the reason I do that is my brain tends to pick up more when I've actually printed things off than when I have just looking through it, because your eye tends to see what it wants to see, especially if you have been working on that assignment for quite some time. So quite often you need to give yourself some time once you've done your work to sort of say, okay, I'll do that this afternoon or the next day, and move on to something else. You can, if you want, rather than using the strike through tool, is move text to where text that you're not quite sure of and put it in footnotes. So that way it's still there if you want to come back to it. And then once you're happy with your final edit, just delete it. I personally use, I have another document which is kind of for coming back to. I call it a dumping ground, that's what I call my document. I'll show you on the next slide. So I kind of don't take anything away. I never want to lose anything because it could come back handy in the future. So each of those three options, the work's still there for you to come back to if you want to. So when you are ready, you can. Another important consideration is for you to check your essay plan and ask yourself, are you covering too much? It's quite easy to think, particularly when you've got indicative content, that you've got to cover it all. And generally, you won't need to cover it all. And that's why it's really important to write an essay plan and share that with your tutors or with your peers to think about what approach you're going to be taking for that essay in advance. And then you can start sort of prioritising and reviewing that and thinking about pruning the less relevant points and perhaps removing those or just try to weave them in rather than develop them. What you want to make sure is that you've got, whilst you want breadth to your argument, you really need that depth to your argument as well. So you're having a broad range of points without the depth within that is not so attractive from a reading and marking perspective. So I really encourage you to prioritise your points and be really focused. And you can obviously set the parameters in your introduction for the areas that you're covering and the areas that you're not. And in your conclusion, you can refer to areas that perhaps you haven't covered, which may be of interest for future work, particularly in dissertations. Point 6, I think that's been encapsulated throughout. So look for one word that can replace two, for example, and start reviewing the starting sections of your sentences. quite often you can remove the first part of it and get to the point much quicker. So I suggest that you, as a task, start looking, if you've got the time, at all of your sentences and thinking about, okay, is there anything here that I actually need? When do I get to the point that I'm trying to make? And again, that takes time. So I mentioned about having, I call it a dumping ground, but on this example, so I use Google Docs for writing a lot of my work. I just find it much easier. You could do this on a Word document, it's not a problem at all. So on here, I've got a split screen. So if you notice on the left-hand side, this is my actual written work. And then anything in my proofreading, I've got my dumping ground, that's just what I called it, document here. And I'll cut and paste the areas that I haven't covered or don't want to put in at that point in time. And I might put them in different headings. I can select those. You can have a couple of different dumping grounds if you wanted to. But then I can then review and reflect against what I've left out at the end and see whether or not I need those anymore. That works particularly well for me. I'll go refer you to this book by Mewburn et al. It's quite new, 2019. I was recommended it by a colleague, and it really is a fantastic book. In chapter 5, there's a lot about filler words, and I've taken some photos of extracts of the book, page 103 to 104, that you might want to, if you're interested in looking at the book, you might find this of use. I've taken the core points for you about what sort of words you could remove. So what the book has done is it's used a list for filler words that you just might be overusing in text. And Mewburn and et al. Talk about asking, are these words a friend or are they a foe? Are they really needed? So on this slide, you've got a number of different, kind of filler words, which as an example, you might want to just use, if you use Control and F on your document, or you've got your, you've got a little magnifying sort of glass, it's like a search function you can use to actually just go through and search for those words. I know quite a few of my students do that. So you've got some here, and you've got some additional words here. I think what you have to really think about is, if you removed any of those words, would it change the meaning? Because if it does, don't remove them. And does it make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, don't remove them. That is really important. And you've got a range of different words here, which you might want to just keep an eye out for in your work. I'll let you read those in your own time. And at the bottom here, they refer to nominalizations. So things with a suffix, so that's an added kind of ending, like eon, like ocean, ism, mint, nus, ants, ints. There might be things just to be aware of and look for. And the same with any adjectives with suffixes at the end. I mentioned illy earlier, and you've got a range of different ones. So again, just look to see if you've got any particular words that you think, okay, do I really need this, and could it be replaced by something different that means exactly the same thing. Reviewing your punctuation is also another area which we encourage the students to think about. Quite often I see quite short sentences which could be combined, or semicolons could be used. As an example, I've seen in the past where a student may say, there are a number of factors which affect this topic, and then it'll be a full stop, and then these topics include, where really, or these factors include, where really it should be one whole sentence where there are a number of factors that affect this topic which include, and then use perhaps a colon there to explain them. So really look out for those short sentences. How they can appear to the reader is almost a descriptive bullet point list, where you just haven't put them in bullet points. So think about looking out for those and see if any of your sentences can be combined to provide the same meaning. And again, that will help on your word count. We've got an example here to have a look at. So some tips for you. I've mentioned this quite a few times, but reading is so important. We encourage children to read to improve their vocab, their spelling and their grammar, and it really is no different for you guys. Reading journals and academic books will really make a difference. You also need to know when to stop. This could be an endless task. So sometimes use your own judgment, know when to stop, and know when to use your judgment in terms of, what are these things that we've discussed today you want to take on board. You don't have to take everything on board, do you? You can just focus on the core things that you think will make a difference for you now, and you'll build upon your stamina for concise writing as you progress through your studies and into postgrad studies too. Really encourage you to work with someone else. I pose the question, do you have a study buddy group? That's what I call them. But small peer groups, three students, 4 max, I would say, where you can kind of work together in this. And check out the resources that I'm going to provide you over the next couple of slides. So I mentioned Power Thesaurus, you've got that here. Grammarly is a fantastic tool. There is a free version and there's a paid version, but they'll look at not only your grammar, but they will look at writing concisely. So there's some resources on what is concise writing. Much of what I've shared with you today have come from these different resources here. We've got a number of different universities, guides on writing concisely, if you want to develop your knowledge over and above what I've gone through to take today with you. And lastly, as I always usually put on my presentations, is to remember to believe in yourself. You can do this. It's about making time for yourself to be able to do it. And I wish you all the best with it. Thank you for listening.